as far as season finales go, the one where Rachel finds out is obviously pretty great. And I'm not the biggest fan of seasons that end on cliffhangers, mainly because I'm massively impatient to wait for what happens. But I guess on the bright side for me, I started watching Friends in maybe 2003, 2004. I was able to, buy all of the VHSs slowly but surely, and I don't believe I would have had to have waited to find out what happens next. If you do remember watching this on broadcast, though, I'd be very interested to know whether or not you did feel that kind of anxious anticipation of finding out what happened. I will discuss what happens in this episode, but I won't discuss what happens at the start of season 2, so there'll be spoilers for the one where Rachel finds out, not for the next episode. This aired originally in May 1995. This episode was directed by Kevin Bright, and it's Rachel's birthday. Everybody's given her gifts, and she receives a gift from Ross. Ross is absent. He is away working in China. And it's worth pointing out that the entire time he is away in China, which I think was for a week or 2 weeks, give or take, the entire thing takes place in this episode. And Rachel receives from him the brooch, of course, and we have one of my favourite lines. One of my favourite lines in the whole of Friends is the entire line, "Crystal duck." Absolutely love it. I realise it's one of those things where you have to be there, you need the context. I'm assuming since this is a spoiler discussion, you know what I mean, and I absolutely love it. And Rachel finds out eventually that Ross is basically madly in love with her. And the majority of the episode is basically her trying to work out whether or not she is going to tell Ross that she knows how he feels, and more importantly, whether or not she wants to actually start a relationship with Ross. And it's not quite clear what direction she's going to take. If Monica had her say, Monica would demand that they got together, got married, had babies, etc. I have to say it's quite unclear what direction Rachel is going to take, and I'm kind of glad that they didn't just immediately go, okay, this is what Rachel's going to do. They gave her time to think through it, and they gave her time to come to terms with it. As I said, this does take place across the entire time that Ross is actually away. So I don't know if this is going to be the longest time frame in a Friends episode, but usually Friends episodes don't take place over an entire week, give or take. So it's quite an interesting use of time, and I think it works very well. During this time as well, Joey is also taking part in a fertility study, and that means he is unable to have sex with his girlfriend, and he gets to spend a bit more time focusing on her needs instead, and it's an interesting discussion about selfishness in the bedroom, or I guess a lack of selfishness. And it's an interesting side to Joey, and we rarely get to see much of his girlfriends, because he obviously has very brief relationships with a lot of women, and sometimes we get to see more of some than others. This one was a nice little change to focus on, and I liked it. The episode itself is obviously very strong. I'm about to discuss what happens at the end. I have already said spoilers. But just briefly, one thing I want to mention as well, one of my favourite things in this episode is the discussion on the balcony. When Rachel is on the balcony with her date, and she begins to think about Ross. And she has this conversation with Ross, technically in her head, but on screen we see Ross in the balcony. And it's so effectively done that I buy into this particular scene so much that I feel like Ross isn't there. Even though obviously in reality, in the studio, David Schwimmer is standing next to Jennifer Aniston on the balcony. But in my mind, he is just a representation of a figment of her imagination. Well, maybe not a figment of her imagination, he is a real person, but he is just a representation of what is going on in her head. And I didn't believe that he was on the balcony. He wasn't really there. And I genuinely bought into that. It was very effectively done, and it's something that just impressed me. So at the very end, of course, we see Rachel going to the airport to meet Ross. Who knows what's going to happen next if she tells him how she feels, but we, the viewer, see Ross with another woman. What their exact relationship is, who knows? But this is definitely going to throw a spanner in the works. What could possibly happen next? For whatever reason, I know the next episode very, very well. the first episode of season 2. It's a brilliant episode, but I'm not going to discuss that just now because I refuse to give any spoilers. But the one where Rachel finds out, I feel, is definitely a really strong episode of Friends. Really thoroughly enjoyable, as most episodes are, of course. A great way to end the first season. I would love to know if you do remember watching it on broadcast, or if you watched it and didn't have access to the next episode. How did you feel? I genuinely don't remember watching this for the first time, but I expect that I would have, if I didn't have the VHSs at the time, I would have been watching it on Channel 4. At which point they would have repeated the next episode either the same day or the next day. Definitely wouldn't have had long to wait. But either way, even now, with the ability to immediately watch the next episode, still gives me butterflies. Definitely a very strong season finale.